you are not your startup. And two is your startup success or failure is not just about you, right? It's about so many other things. And therefore being much more open to saying like, hey, this is a playground and there are many things that are going to impact how this playground pans out.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Off to the Valley, where we explore the stories of entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders who are shaping industries and creating impact on a global scale. I'm your host, Pratik Panda, and we are honored to have with us today Shruti Kapoor, a dynamic leader with over 15 years of experience spanning across investment banking, technology, and sales enablement. Shruti is the founder of Wingman, a sales enablement platform that was acquired by Clari in 2022. She went on to lead Clari's international business, and she's currently also a mentor and coach to other founders. Her career is fascinating blend of strategic leadership, tech-driven solutions, and personal development, making her an inspiring figure in both the startup world and beyond. Shruti, it's a pleasure to have you with us today, and we are eager to dive into your journey.
Thanks for the generous introduction, Pratik. Excited to be here.
Great. So let's start with this, right? You've had a very diverse career. You were working in investment banking, typically pays well, a lot of travel, good projects. What motivated you to move into tech entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I think tech was always my first love. I did my undergrad in life sciences, so always the science and technology space was very exciting for me. In fact, even my investment banking was in the telecom and media sector, which, of course, back in 2007, 2008 was undergoing a massive shift, especially in Asia with the privatization happening across the board. And in fact, one of the deals that I worked with while I was there was the Friendster deal. So that's kind of where we were at that point in time, right? With social media and tech just beginning to spawn and have kind of another life after the 2000 bust. So at that point, when the opportunity came up to actually work with a fund that was investing in really early stage tech, working with university researchers, that was pretty exciting for me. And it basically was one gradual shift at a time. So went from investment banking to investing in early stage tech, and that allowed me to continue to be really close to the tech world, to the startup ecosystem as well. And slowly, I think that pull got me all the way to starting up my own company in tech.
That's amazing. Did you have any kind of background from the past, like in the family or anyone that was particularly inspirational to you?
There wasn't so much an entrepreneurial thread as you would traditionally imagine, but my father is a dentist. And what you realize is that if you want to build a private practice, it is actually very much like being an entrepreneur. So I think seeing that closely was very interesting for me. And I would say that was maybe the closest thread I had because he rerouted himself from being in a small town and moving to Lucknow to establish his practice from scratch. So just seeing that, how did he build it up? What was his way of doing marketing? How do you do good NPS scores with your customers? The pre CRM era of having cards. And I was always closely involved in his dental practice. I was his so called assistant through that. And I would kind of help him keep records of things. So, yeah, it was great.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Shruti. Talking about CRMs and enablement and sales, you founded this company called Wingman. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the idea was really simple. When I was in the business development and sales side, one of the biggest challenges I faced was the customer would give us some feedback that could be very interesting for marketing, that could be very interesting for product. But it was very hard to actually channel that back. And, by the time you translated and shared that information, it didn't kind of have the same impact as the customer telling you what they were thinking and why they were thinking that. And so that was kind of one reason why I was thinking like, hey, instead of having to then arrange another call with the customer and the product team to get that feedback loop going, wouldn't it be great if like I could actually just have that call recorded and shareable with product person? And then the second thing, as I started managing a sales team, was I had people who were working super hard but not seeing results in their sales.
Mm.
And then there were people who would just know where to put the effort and they would always be hitting quota. And as a person, trying to manage that sales team, I felt it was my responsibility to help people figure out what was working, what was not working. But it was really hard to do that with just post facto conversations. So, fast forwarding a little bit, with Wingman, what we did was we said, hey, there is a lot of valuable information in sales calls. And this is back in 2017, 2018, when it wasn't so acceptable to be recording every meeting. Like today, you have a bot literally on every meeting. And the idea was like, hey, what if we could record every sales call and then get specific insights that could help the business in that process of either sharing the voice of customer with other teams, making strategic decisions based on voice of customer, and of course, helping salespeople and sales teams to get better in their performance across the board. And then, very specifically, what we did was we developed a bot that could join these meetings, that would do the transcription of the calls, and that would give in real time feedback to the salesperson. So, while the salesperson was on the call, if a question got thrown at that person, and it would surface information saying, hey, this is how you compare with this competitor, or, these are the other customers you've sold to in this industry. So, it would give them immediate feedback, immediate access to content. It would even give behavioral feedback. So, you've been speaking for too long or you're speaking too fast. And of course, one of the post call stuff that we are much more familiar with today, which is create a follow up email for you, create call summarization, and then do the aggregate comparison across salespeople, across different deals, and all of that.
That is amazing. Yeah, like you rightly said, a lot of this today we almost have started to take for granted, but it's amazing that a few years ago you were able to sort of build all of this into the product. And rightly, it brought you to Y Combinator. And although it has been a few years since you folks graduated out of the program, but can you tell me a little bit about your experience with the YC program?
So this is in summer of 2019. We were literally the last batch that was able to do it fully in person before the pandemic came upon us. And it was really exciting for many reasons. And then there were, of course, many practical takeaways. I think just everybody has always heard about YC. I'd never really spent any time in the Valley at that point. I'd worked with companies in the US. I traveled, but not really spent that much time in the Valley. So that, one was, it was just a very prestigious program. So getting into it automatically opens doors. So I like to call it like you do an MBA, and it's not so much about what you learn there, but it's as much about the network you build and the stamp it gives you. YC is definitely a strong stamp, no doubt about it. Your fundraise process was very smooth, at least in those days. There was pretty good equation between the demand and supply. So that was fantastic. But I think the most lasting impact has been just knowing how difficult the founder journey is. And I think YC does a really good job in letting people understand that, hey, there are going to be ups and there are going to be downs. And every founder, like whether it's Brian Chesky or Patrick Colson, everybody goes through those ups and downs, and hearing it from their mouth on how they've gone through it, how it's really changed them, what are some of the lessons they've learned is very useful because, invariably you will go through that in your own journey. And then like you feel like, okay, I'm not the only idiot. I'm not completely incompetent. It's just part of the founding journey. So yeah, I think it really brought together a lot of appreciation for that. And then I think the second part of it, again, goes back to people and their growth, right? Which is YC really makes it clear that the most common reason why companies fail is co-founder relationships. One is it became a forcing function for us to anyway spend 3 months together living in the same apartment through YC, but they kind of give you some useful frameworks to work through the conflicts that you might have on how to make sure that you anticipate those. And I think, again, that's one of the things that is going to outlast, your initial fundraise and the theory of how to do your 0 to 1 GTM, because those are things that you're going to have to deal with throughout your founding journey.
Yeah, I would imagine that in addition to the things that you said, just having that community where you have other people in a similar journey, similar stage, would have been very helpful to really sort of get that feeling that you're not the only one experiencing all the highs and lows.
Yeah, that's true. So I would say, like back home in India, we also had a pretty good community with SaaS Boomi helping a lot of SaaS founders. That's even more, I would say, consolidated group in terms of the learnings that can cross over because everybody is trying to be in the same field, sell to the similar kind of audiences, going through the same product journey, so to speak. So, yes, I think broadly speaking, extremely useful to build your community around you that helps you both tactically through the ups and lows and, of course, mentally through the ups and lows.
Yeah. And I think, you gave a great example of SaaS Boomi, and I've seen them over the years become this really helpful, close knit community. I've had a chance to participate in multiple of their events in the Bay Area. But talking about communities, the US or Silicon Valley in general also has this sort of community vibe. We spoke about SaaS Boomi in India. You are currently sitting in Dubai. Tell me what community means in Dubai, at least as of today.
Yeah, so I've been in Dubai now for almost 3 years, and I think Dubai has been an interesting melting pot for people coming in from different parts of the world. There are things that are available here, and I think there are things in the ecosystem that are still missing that need to build up, at least from an entrepreneurship, tech entrepreneurship standpoint. I would say that it's still a lot more in the nascent stage, right? Like maybe think of it as India, maybe 5, 6, 7 years back, right? When people were trying to figure out. I think there are definitely clusters in fintech, in the world of cryptocurrency, etc. But more broadly speaking, it's a lot more nascent. And that's also because it's a very different market. All right. So in some ways, if you think of it, especially as a tech market, it's much smaller. And also in its tech adoption curve, it's much earlier, which opens its different types of opportunities because it's a market that is different from India in the sense that the ability to spend or the per person cost is anyways high, but it's similar to India in the sense that the tech adoption is low, right? In some cases, it's even much lower than India in a business context. So it's an interesting dynamic of its own.
So, for all the other founders that are listening to this episode, right? And I know many of my founder friends in India have all contemplated about moving to Dubai at some point. Um, People keep thinking about moving to the valley. That's where customers are. The network is stronger, more capital, and so on. Based on all the things that you said right now about Dubai, do you think that there is a segment of founders that might benefit being in Dubai? Is there like, what would you say is the right reason to be in Dubai?
Yeah, so I think one of the things with Dubai is definitely the most well connected city in the world, right? So if you're still in the phase where you're figuring out your market, and I know a lot of people go through that journey of saying, like, yes, US is a pretty difficult bet. Maybe our product will service a different market better. And in that case, Dubai is a good spot for you to both figure out the Middle Eastern market and also the European market, right? And also the talent pool access, especially in terms of sales and then language skills, is pretty diverse. So, if you're thinking about like, hey, setting up a team that can sell to different markets in Europe, etc., it's going to be very easy for you to find talent with whatever language skills you're looking for. Also, the time zone tends to be quite favorable, say, as compared to people who might be thinking between Singapore versus Dubai. Like one of my reasons was like, hey, if I go to Singapore and if I need to do anything with the West Coast, I'm just going to like never sleep, right? Whereas Dubai is a little bit in between India and the US. So I think those factors definitely play. And there is access to funding. Funding ecosystem works a little bit differently here than in the US, but there are funds who do want to invest in technology. So I think that is another reason. And then definitely the proximity and connectivity back to India, right? So if you're thinking of having a team in India and, exploring different markets, it's still a good place to park yourself because you could still be going back to any of the Indian cities on a 3 hour flight, and pretty well connected to pretty much every place. So I think those are some of the big reasons. And not to mention the fact that it's fairly business friendly, fairly tax friendly. You don't have currency restrictions like you do in India. in terms of like who can invest in you, who can't invest in you, who can you issue ESOPs to. I know a lot of founders in India spend way more time than they would ever want to on figuring out like, hey, RBI launched this new thing. What does
Yeah.
it mean? And can I issue advisor equity? And can I have people who are not on my payroll have ESOPs? Like a lot of that mess that none of us really enjoy dealing with.
Yeah, I think all of that makes a lot of sense, and I'm definitely sure there's a lot of things that you mentioned where somebody can think a little bit deeper and really pick if this is for me. And the good part about Dubai right now is that it's so easy to access from India, from so many different cities, that you can go spend some time and get a feel for it before you really decide. And it's not as significant as a move as you have to move to the US or Canada or whatever. It still feels closer to home, at least if you're from moving from India. On that note, switching context a little bit, in about 3 years from the time that you graduated out of the YC program, you got acquired by Clari, big name in the industry. How did that acquisition come about? Was that something that you folks as founders planned, or was it chance? How did it come about?
Like every good marriage, there is always a little bit of chance and a little bit of preparation. But I mean, I think we were like the universe has to somewhat collude to make certain things happen. And I think acquisitions are a bit like that. In our case, it's interesting the timing, right? So this was back in 2022. I was like, okay, this is the time for me. The world has finally opened up to travel. Let me go and spend some more time in the US and maybe meet some investors. And while I was on that flight from Bangalore to US is when the Russia-Ukraine war started. Right. So I had no idea by the time I landed in San Francisco, I got like the first message I saw was, hey, do you know Russia, Ukraine? And I'm like, what? And by the time I got out of the airport, it was quite clear to me that the world as we know it was feeling very different. And like everybody was in this panic mode. I think people had already been talking about, hey, the markets are overpriced, they're overheated, and the valuations are out of whack. And then, like, this was just the perfect excuse slash reason to say, okay, let's all pull back and hold off and like not do anything for a while because nobody knows what's going to happen in the world. Just to say that whenever you think of stories of either, great successes, great failures, big funding rounds, whatever it is, right? There is so much else that impacts it that, yes, people can go and say that we built a great company or we built a great product, but there's like so much else outside of your control that's always happening. That was the context in which I landed there. And then this was one of the conversations as part of my visit to the US that I was having. At that point, given how everything else was developing, it seemed like maybe acquisition is a good option for us. And as it transpired, there were quite a few people who were interested in the space, right? So we had multiple potential acquirers. And again, this is one of those things where something which seemingly looks bad might actually be good, right? So what was happening was that as an industry, because the budgets for sales tech were being cut, it meant that there was a lot of pressure for people to consolidate their sales buying, right? And sales tools were therefore saying like, let me give you a more packaged offering where I'm no longer an expert in one thing, but maybe I can give you like 4 tools so that you don't have to go shop for 4 different things. Right. So in that consolidation story is we therefore landed ourselves. And again, the consolidation was somewhat driven by the markets trying to come off the overheated situation that they were in. So yeah, I think in the middle of all of we became somewhat desirable hot property. And that's kind of how the whole acquisition thing panned out.
Shruti, you said something almost in passing, but I feel like that is such a critical skill to have, especially as founders. You mentioned that you landed in the US and heard about the war. You already started reading signals that the market is slowing down and so many things, right? And on the basis of which you figured acquisition is a good opportunity. I've made this mistake in my early days, and I still meet with so many founders who are so passionate about the problem that they are solving that they are almost oblivious to what is happening outside, right, in the macro context. Is there any sort of, since you've been there in that sort of position before, is there something that you could tell other founders listening to this on why it's maybe also important to, I know it's hard to emotionally detach ourselves from our startups, but at some points you need to do a reality check perhaps. And what is that time to do that, right? Like, how do you be more open and more receptive to all these things?
I think you, as a startup founder, you have to be doing a reality check all the time. And you have to be reading the signals, um, what each of those things could be. Sometimes they will play out, sometimes they won't. But it's important to be trying to at least mentally make those bets and make those projections, because it's almost like a muscle memory, right? Like you slowly get better at it, right? And say, take for example, like the Nvidia stock going down 20% or whatever in 24 hours. Like if you are looking at this situation a week back, was there anything that would have made you think about this? What would have made you double down on it? What would have made you take a step back, right? So just things like that. And I think it's it's important to be able to also understand, like what I said earlier, right? Which is there is so much out of my control that whether there's a success or a failure, it's not entirely on me. So there are several levels of detachment, like you said, right? One is you are not your startup, and two is your startup success or failure is not just about you, right? It's about so many other things. And therefore, being much more open to saying, like, hey, this is a playground and there are many things that are going to impact how this playground pans out. I think that's kind of my one advice, which is whatever story you read and whatever story you're telling yourself about your company is your own part to play in that is maybe 10%, right? There is so much else that's out of your control. And I think just being able to acknowledge and respect that eases a lot of stuff mentally and hopefully helps us make better decisions. That's also some of the stuff that when I work with founders now as a coach, I try to do, which is like try to help them understand what are the decisions that they're making out of fear and what are the decisions that they're making out of real conviction, and making sure that you over a period of time get better at making better decisions and actually implementing them, because making the decision is sometimes easy, but making it happen all the way through is harder. Right. So it was the same thing for us.
Absolutely.
Like even when the acquisition was an option, it was still a lot of internal dialogue on saying like, hey, is this the time when we do want to consider this? You know, we are growing well. There's so much going for us. What if we just see how this plays out for the next 18 months?
Getting co-founder alignment on that would have been challenging too.
Yeah. I mean, you have to get co-founder alignment, but you also have to get yourself into a position where you're like, okay, this is going to be like a no regrets thing if I do it. And even if 2 years later, this company is like, say, 10x in its revenues, will I go back beating myself up? Or will I be like, yes, that was that. And that's the 2 years of my opportunity cost as well.
Yeah, there's this quote, right? You miss all the shots that you don't take. So it's like a lot of times the regret is there only because we don't take an action on something. It's rarely that you do something and then have regret, why did I do it? But typically when you are at a crossroad, if you take an action, you'll have usually less regret that because you at least gave it a chance for all the right reasons, hopefully. You did mention a little bit about you spending more time with founders as a founder coach. You are spending most of your time as a coach these days. Can you tell us a little bit more about your practice and what do you really specialize in?
Sure. So, the reason why I spend time doing this is because when I was a founder and the pandemic suddenly happened, right? Like literally overnight, I was like, okay, we are not really well equipped to deal with this. And I went and got like a coaching service to help get coaching support for everybody in my company. And we were pretty small at that point. And I felt I really benefited from it. It helped me understand things about like, basic things about how I make decisions, how that relates to maybe the beliefs I hold about myself, and how that might have absolutely nothing to do with starting that business. And so through that journey, I realized like very often we have so many blind spots of our own, and especially as founders, they get more and more layered because over a period of time, you get so good at presenting the story that you want others to believe in that it becomes hard for you to even know what is the story that you believe in or that you are questioning all the time. So, yeah, I mean, today I basically want to hopefully reduce that misery of the founder journey in some ways for other people that I work with. And the idea is really simple. I spend an hour or so every week with each founder that I work with. And the idea is you bring to the table whatever is top of mind for you. We deconstruct it, we work through either tactical stuff around it. So it could be a fundraise, it could be like I'm not converting these pilots, it could be, like you said, co founder conflicts are pretty common as well. So it could be any of those things. And of course, that flavor keeps changing. But the idea really is can somebody stand there and show you the mirror and ask you the tough questions that maybe you're running away from? So I look at myself more as, hey, I'm here to show you the mirror. I'm not here to solve your problems because I know that you know how to solve all those problems. But you might not necessarily be doing a very good job at identifying what that problem is. And so that's broadly what I do.
That's amazing, Shruti. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And as we wrap up, any last pieces of advice? If there's one thing you wanted some of the founders listening to this show to remember or follow, what would you say?
I think just remember that you are not your company and things that are good or things that are bad might happen, but it's not all down to you. So don't give yourself too much credit and don't beat yourself too much either.
Yeah, I think that is such great advice. And so many founders, and since you mentioned this, right, I thought I'd just share anyway, and maybe you have more to add. So many founders struggle with, especially the bad days. As founders, most of the times we see highs, yes, but the lows are like just excruciatingly low. The highs are high, but the lows are terribly low. And that's been consistent with so many founders that I've spoken to. And those are the days when you feel so helpless, also because you keep tying or associating yourself to the startup so strongly that you think you are the startup. And if that's going down, basically you're going down, but that's not true. And that's where we need that strong community to help us realize, like you just said, that you have to have that conscious detachment. You have all the ability in you to turn things back around or observe reality trends and act accordingly, right? And I think great piece of advice, Shruti. Thank you so much for spending time with us. It was amazing to hear from you, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are going to find this helpful.
Thanks, Pratik. Yeah, hopefully we get the right messages and hopefully we have fewer stressed out founders. I don't know if
Yeah,
that's possible, but yes.
definitely. Thank you so much again, Shruti. And that wraps up today's episode. Before we sign off, I would like to thank you for your support and thanks for tuning in. If you loved today's episode, then don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and never miss an episode. Be kind, be happy, challenge the norm. I'll see you folks again for the next one.